Have you ever been disappointed by someone you love and found yourself wondering why it affected you as much as it did? Maybe it was something they said, maybe it was something they didn't say. Maybe things didn't go the way you'd hope. Whatever the situation, perhaps you've walked away asking yourself, why did that bother me so much? One of the things I've noticed is that sometimes the way we're affected by a situation has just as much to do with what happened long before that moment as it does with the moment itself. And I think that's one of the reasons we need to better understand our expectations because sometimes they reveal things we've never stopped to consider. Hello and welcome to Daring Woman. I'm Dr. Latasha Pinckney, a belief transformation facilitator. And through my work, I help people better understand the experiences, beliefs, and perspectives that shape how they see themselves, others, and the world around them so they can move forward with greater understanding and intention. Whether you're trying to better understand your own life or you're someone who helps others make sense of theirs, welcome to the channel. Before we get into today's conversation, I wanted to acknowledge that you're probably not used to seeing me in glasses, and I might just keep moving them around because honestly, I'm not used to them. I don't like wearing them on camera because of the glare, but something's going on with my eyes, so I figured the glasses might be less distracting. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get into it. I think most of us would say we have certain ideas about what we expect from other people. For instance, we expect, for the most part, that people will be honest, that they'll keep their word. We expect the people we love to care about the things that matter to us. And I'll just say the quiet part out loud. We also expect people to respond in ways that make sense to us. But what happens when those expectations are not met? We may find ourselves feeling frustrated, disappointed, or confused, particularly when those expectations involve the people we love. And when that happens, of course, we naturally focus on what the other person did or didn't do. But more often than not, those moments reveal expectations we never recognized as such because to us, they simply felt like the way things should be. The truth is, however, that expectations, even the unspoken ones, don't simply appear out of nowhere. They have a history, one that has developed over time through the experiences we've had and the way we've come to understand those experiences. And that's one of the reasons understanding how perception works is so important. Now, we've talked about perception before, but because it is so closely connected to our expectations, I wanted to spend just a little more time discussing it today. When we hear the word perception, I think most of us immediately think about what we experience through our senses, what we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. And while that's certainly part of perception, it only captures part of what perception really is. Perception also involves how we organize and interpret those experiences. In many ways, perception is what connects our experiences to the meanings we eventually attach to them. Of course, not every experience changes the course of our lives, and not every meaning we assign is deep or profound. But as humans, we naturally try to understand what we're experiencing. We want to know what happened, and once we have some understanding of the event itself, we naturally begin asking why it happened. And as we continue making sense of the experience, we begin asking perhaps the most important question of them all: what does it mean? And little by little, the meanings we attach to those experiences begin influencing the way we understand ourselves, the way we understand other people, and even what we come to expect from future experiences and relationships. So if our expectations don't simply appear out of nowhere, the next question becomes, well, where do they come from? I think the answer is probably more complex than many of us realize because none of us enters a new experience without bringing something with us. With every new conversation, with every new relationship, and with every new situation, we're carrying with us a lifetime of experiences along with the memories, beliefs, and assumptions that developed because of them. Whether we're aware of it or not, all of those things influence how we understand what's happening around us. Now, we've already established that our experiences influence what we come to expect. Now the question is, how? I've used this analogy before, but I think it fits here as well, and that is how two people can experience the very same situation and walk away with two completely different understandings of what happened. not because one person is right and the other person is wrong, but because each person is interpreting that experience through a lifetime of experiences that came before it. And if the meaning each person attaches to that experience is different, it shouldn't surprise us that the expectations that grow out of those experiences may be different as well. The reason that's important is because every new experience is understood in the light of the experiences we've already had. And often, without giving it much thought, we begin comparing what we're experiencing now with what has happened before. This means that those earlier experiences become the reference points we use to understand what we're experiencing in the present. Think about it this way. Imagine someone whose relationships have consistently been marked by honesty and dependability. After years of experiences like that, it makes sense that they may come to expect honesty and dependability from other people. Now consider someone whose experiences have repeatedly communicated something very different. Maybe the people they depended on weren't always there. Maybe people made them promises that were broken. Maybe love felt conditional to them, or relationships left them with one disappointment after another. Given experiences like those, it makes sense that they might begin expecting similar patterns to show up in future relationships. And because those expectations have become what feels normal, they may not even recognize the influence they're having. It's not often until someone responds differently than they expected or perhaps hoped that they stop to consider what it was they were expecting in the first place. Up until this point, we've been talking about expectations in a fairly broad sense, but I think where they become most visible is in our closest relationships. When two people come together, they aren't just bringing themselves into the relationship, they're also bringing with them everything that has shaped what they've come to expect from one another. The interesting thing is that when we first meet someone, we don't usually sit down and explain everything we expect from the relationship. We may talk about some of our expectations, but certainly not all of them. Truth be told, we probably couldn't explain it all because some of those expectations haven't even become apparent to us yet. But as we spend time together, we begin to talk more openly about what those expectations are, while others simply develop as the relationship grows. Take a husband and a wife, for example. They may both genuinely love one another, yet have completely different expectations about what healthy communication looks like. One may have grown up in a home where every disagreement was talked through immediately. The other may have learned that when emotions run high, you step away to cool off, gather your thoughts, and then come back to the conversation later. One approach is not better than the other. They're just simply different. But if neither person understands where those expectations came from, it's easy to assume the other person doesn't care, isn't listening, or is intentionally avoiding the conversation altogether. And the same thing can happen in friendships. One person may believe being a good friend means showing up for every birthday, every celebration, every difficult season, and every major life event. Another may believe that friendship isn't defined by being present for every single moment, but by the confidence that the relationship will remain strong, even when life pulls them in different directions. The fact is, both people can care deeply about the friendship, yet simply have different expectations about what being a good friend looks like. The same thing happens in families, it happens in the workplace, it happens in our churches. It shows up in what respect looks like to us, the support and encouragement we give, and even what we believe responsibility requires. And sometimes it's easy to mistakenly assume other people understand those things the same way we do. As I think about my own story, I see how some of these same patterns played out in my marriage and in motherhood. I've shared before that I carried the belief for many years that I was unloved, and whether I was consciously aware of that belief or not, it quietly influenced many of the expectations I had of my husband and my children. What eventually became clear to me was that some of what I expected had very little to do with them and much more to do with experiences that had shaped me long before they became part of my life. While I've spoken quite a bit throughout this series about the roles my mother, grandmother, and aunt played in my life, I really haven't talked much about my father. The truth is that while our relationship is in a good place today, growing up, he wasn't a steady or consistent presence in my life. And honestly, I don't think I understood at the time how much that experience was shaping what I would come to expect from my husband, but it absolutely did. Now, as wives, I think it is perfectly natural and reasonable for us to expect our husbands to love us, care for us, protect us, and provide for our families. Those are all things I think many of us believe are part of a husband's role. But for me, some of my expectations went beyond that. At the time, I don't think I would have thought of it that way, but I think there was a quiet hope that being deeply loved by my husband would somehow heal the part of me that had spent years longing for the love and presence of a father. While, of course, a husband and father have different roles, there are some places where those roles naturally overlap. Because of that, it makes sense that some of the longings I had been living with since childhood found their way into my marriage. Motherhood, on the other hand, revealed something different. If you've listened to any of the episodes, I think it's probably clear by now that I love being a mother. I love being a mother still. And as exhausting as it was at times, I loved taking care of my children and being involved in their lives. And if I'm honest, I also found a great deal of comfort in being needed. And again, I don't think there's anything unusual about that. I imagine most parents would understand exactly what I mean. What eventually became clear to me was that the comfort I found in being needed wasn't just about being a mother. Like my marriage, some of it had been shaped long before I ever had children. The woman who became a mother was still carrying the experiences of the little girl she'd once been, the little girl who had grown up believing she was unloved. So at times, I held on a little tighter to the comfort that came from being needed. There was something about the way my children needed me, wanted me close, and looked to me that touched a place in me that had been longing for years to know without question that I was deeply loved. Now, this wasn't a responsibility I consciously placed on them, but over the years, being needed had become such a natural part of my life that I never imagined what it would feel like when that began to change. So when my oldest graduated from high school and I was no longer needed in the same way, it made sense why the transition felt much harder than I had ever expected. When I think about my marriage and motherhood today, what comes to mind isn't primarily the expectations those relationships revealed, it's the grace God showed me through them. Because as much as those relationships exposed longings that had been with me for years, they also became part of the way God was bringing healing to those places in my life. One of the things that's changed over the years isn't that I've stopped having expectations. Of course, I still have them. The difference is that I'm more likely to stop and ask myself where that expectation is coming from before I decide what it means. There was a time when if an expectation wasn't met, it was easy for me to take it personally, somehow attaching to it the meaning that I was unloved or undervalued. Today, before I assume that someone's response says something about me or about our relationship, I'm more likely to stop and ask myself what I'm really responding to. Is this about what's happening in the moment, or is something from my past influencing the way I'm experiencing it today? That doesn't mean every expectation is unreasonable. If someone repeatedly breaks their promises, dismisses your feelings, or refuses to be honest with you, those are real concerns. Healthy relationships require trust, honesty, and mutual care. The point isn't that we shouldn't have expectations. The point is becoming more aware of what those expectations are asking of the people we love. But that isn't always easy to do because we don't always see ourselves as clearly as we think. Over time, I've come to believe that understanding our expectations isn't only about our relationships with other people, it's also about becoming more aware of ourselves. And that's not always something we can do on our own. In Psalms 139:23-24, King David prayed, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." David's prayer reminds us that there are things about ourselves that only God can fully reveal. God knows our deepest thoughts, including the things that remain hidden even from us. He knows the experiences that have shaped us, the meanings we've attached to those experiences, and the expectations that can quietly grow from them. So before we end our time together today, I want to leave you with one question. What would it look like for you to ask God to show you whether some of the expectations you've had of other people have less to do with who they are and what they're capable of giving, and more so to do with the history behind those expectations? Because when God reveals something, it is never to condemn us, but to bring healing to the places that need it most. Thank you so much for joining me here. If today's conversation resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and be sure to like, share, and subscribe so these conversations can reach others. And if you'd like to spend a little more time reflecting on today's episode, I've created a companion resource to go along with it. You'll find the link in the episode description. I'll also be developing additional companion resources for the previous episodes that I've shared, so be on the lookout for that announcement. And don't forget to join me here each Thursday for a new episode. But until next time, keep reflecting, keep growing, and remember that sometimes the most powerful shifts in perspective begin with a single question.